When we start the revolution. When we start the revolution.
Hello, nice to meet you both. We'd like to know what brought you two together, or what inspired the idea of the documentary, and why did you work together?
Do you want to start? Okay, well, I first met Pablo. I think I first met him in Edinburgh. It was quite romantic. I looked into his eyes, and it was basically love at first sight, to be honest. And then he contacted me about the possibility of travelling to Venezuela to make a documentary together. And I knew a little bit about the political process that had taken place in Venezuela, the revolution that brought the current government into power. And obviously I'd always been inspired by what has happened there in recent years and what has happened in Latin America as a continent, where we're seeing progressive anti-imperialist movements coming into political power and doing so much to empower the masses of people in those countries, to empower poor people. So I thought, yeah, I want to go, that sounds great. And we went there. Also, a friend of ours, Loki, a hip-hop artist, was invited to perform at a hip-hop festival that was taking place. And I spoke at the festival as well. And we met up with an organisation called Hop Revoluciòn, who organise these hip-hop festivals, and also they've set up 31 hip-hop schools all over the country. You should talk more about Hip Hop Revolution.
As Jody says, Hip Hop Revoluciòn is this kind of collective of young people who are into hip-hop, but who are also sympathetic or support the political process that's underway in Venezuela under the Chavez government, which has been in power since 1999. And I met one of the founders of Hip Hop Revoluciòn, a guy called Gustavo Borges, in 2005. I went to live in Venezuela for a year and a half. I have family that come from Venezuela, and I'd done a master's focusing on Venezuela, and I decided that before wanting to do a PhD, I wanted to spend some time and get a feel for what was going on in this country, in this political process, which we'd heard a lot about in the media, but generally was very demonized even at that time. So I met Gustavo in 2005 and saw that the work he was doing with different people in different barrios, which are the low-income neighborhoods that surround the capital Caracas and other cities, and just saw the kind of inspiring work that they did in politicizing young people, getting young people involved, thinking about politics, not necessarily bringing down like a line from the Chavez government. They were independent, supportive, critical. They had their own views. They criticized when they felt they needed to, and they supported it when in general. But they were very, they had this spirit of rebellion, and which came, I think, from their love of hip hop music, which embodies that spirit. So I met Gustavo, and at that time I did some work for John Pilger, a documentary maker, on a film called The War on Democracy. Came back to live in the UK, went out to Venezuela to make an independent film on the Venezuelan process called Inside the Revolution, where I interviewed one of the members of Hip Hop Revoluciòn very briefly, because the film really wasn't about that. It was more of an overview and to look at what's happened in Venezuela. So I had this feeling that it was an area of what was taking place in Venezuela that I wanted to take forward, maybe do a film on it. And yeah, I got to know Loki, and through Loki got to know Jody, and then this trip materialized. And yeah, we went out last year and spent not much time there really, but we got to see you know, the work they do outside Caracas, and we got to attend the 8th anniversary concert, which, and I really think that the work they do is kind of inspiring. Even, you know, there is political hip hop in the UK, but the way that they've managed to take their work on another level and go outside the city and create 31 hip hop schools, we just feel it's a story that's worth telling and bringing to a wider audience.
What do you think it is about hip hop that attracts young people specifically, and what message does hip hop have to give young people?
I think Jodie probably knows more, but for me, I mean, I like hip hop music. Obviously, the fact that there is an MC talking quite directly at an audience means that people pay much more attention to the contents of the lyrics in hip hop, and it's become perhaps the global language that sort of transcends. People love hip hop in London, in New York, but they love it in Caracas, in Buenos Aires, in Bombay. So it's managed to transcend as a music form sort of boundaries. So in that sense, it's a very powerful musical form. And the roots of hip hop are, I think, you know, come from a protest music, if you want, and especially for people that live in the inner cities, perhaps, as a way of communicating what they think about life, where they're not given the chance to talk about what they want to talk about in the traditional the media spaces, shall we say. So hip hop is a way for people who are not given a voice in wider society to articulate their concerns, their dreams, etc. So I think in that sense, hip hop is universal and extremely powerful.
Yeah, I think hip hop music and hip hop culture historically has been rooted in resistance movements and liberation movements. And in Venezuela, that is essentially what's taking place. They're rejecting the status quo of imperialism and capitalism and saying we want to do things a different way. And that's always been what hip hop has been about. And I think even though we were there for a short time, when you travel to these places, the contrast to here is so strong that it strikes you straight away. Essentially here we have a government that is interested in preserving the interests of rich people. There you have a government that's aimed at empowering poor people, and that changes every relation in society because people feel that they have a voice, and not only have a voice but they are a part of something that's worth being a part of. That's what I think young people don't have in this country as much, is social projects that you feel are worth participating in, that you feel you're going to get something back from. And the Hop Revoluciòn collective in Venezuela, we can take huge inspiration from what they're doing. Imagine 31 hip hop schools, so you can go to your normal school in a day and then afterwards go and learn how to rap or learn how to DJ. Imagine if young people here had that. It would change their lives, but that's only been possible for them to achieve because of the change in the society they're living in. If they didn't have that support or have that backing, it'd be a lot more difficult to achieve. So I think we're taught about how our country is so great and how other countries need our help, but I think we should be seeing things in a different way and seeing that those people can help us with ideas because they're achieving things that we haven't even thought of yet.
You spoke a little bit about anti-capitalism and anti-imperialism type movements. Obviously, we saw loads of different types of riots over last year in different countries and stuff. What, as somebody who knows what young people are like and stuff, What are your personal opinions on the riots?
The riots in London, my personal opinion is that I think whenever there are riots in a society or at any given point of time, they often reflect the values and the beliefs of that society. So in London, we saw people looting, stealing materialist goods from the shops on their high street. So what does that tell you? If young people are willing to go out and break the law to steal consumer goods that are worth not a massive amount of money, it tells you, number one, that those goods are the things that society tells us are important and tells us we need to have the latest pair of trainers and the latest phone. And number two, it tells you that young people don't place that much value in these communities. Now, that was used by the government and the media to portray this section of society as some kind of underclass or subhuman level of society. But obviously, we all belong to the same society. So if we're disowning such a large section of society, then really we need to be asking ourselves those questions of why it's happening, rather than passing on the blame to other people.
Yeah, and I would just add that I don't think people really in our society really appreciate or quite understand the power of the mainstream media in our societies in channeling, in creating enemies and good guys and bad guys. With the riots, you had them, saying that the young people that were doing this were animals, yet they would never challenge the politicians, our politicians, who are waging war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, who are killing millions of people daily. They would never criticize them for being serial killers, yet the violent ones are the people at the bottom who rebel, rightly or wrongly, against a system which they feel is unjust or that doesn't give them a stake in the system. So we have a political class which gets away with murder, literally, and we have a media class which facilitates and allows them to get away with it uncritically, and then demonizes the people at the bottom of society. So I think we need to really challenge, the media, the mainstream media, and how they channel our feelings, whether it be on the riots where they made vast sectors of British society sort of into a rage about these young people in London, in Tottenham, where they did it with Libya, where they demonize individuals, where now we have Coney 2012, where we create goodies and baddies at an alarming rate, and we kill people, and the media focuses on some but not on others. So we need to become more aware of the power of the media. Someone like John Pilger, who I worked with in Venezuela, has a new film called The War You Don't See, which looks at the role of the media in facilitating and preparing the groundwork for the violence unleashed by our political class, by the US government and by other elite governments in the world, basically in the interest of corporations.